So howdy doody, everybody. Welcome back to the Writers Hangout. My name is Konstantine, yes, and with me is the man from Morpheus, the writer in an industry that hates him, but I think it kind of hates all of us in this. Richard Dansky. Richard, how you doing?
I'm doing great, thank you. How are you doing?
Oh, I'm just. I mean, I could complain, but what's the point? We're here to talk about you, all the things you've done. So primarily, this podcast is based in Greece. A lot of us played Dungeons and Dragons: World of Darkness. A lot of us also know your work from Wraith, the Oblivion, mostly, namely.
Mhm.
Myself, it's from Morpheus. As you can see, it's seen its fair share of use. Uh,
Well,
from the
Lucian Solban gets the lion's share of the credit for Orpheus. I contributed about this much. Lucian is the man who really did the heavy lifting there. So I want to be clear on
Oh,
that and give him his credit because God knows he earned it.
nice, nice. All right, so before we start, like, could you take us through your biography, kind of like how you got started in the industry, what you're doing now?
Sure. So I grew up playing Dungeons and Dragons and then playing all the weird non-Dungeons and Dragons TTRPGs like Call of Cthulhu and Stormbringer and Villains and Vigilantes, and played through college and was part of a LARP group in college that would rent out a camp in northeastern Connecticut, and we'd run around for a weekend dressed up like elves and beating the hell out of each other with plumbing supplies. And one of the folks I knew from college and from that LARP group went off to work at White Wolf. That was Jennifer Hartshorn, who was the original Wraith developer. And Jen did amazing work there. Love Me on Death, one of the most interesting and thoughtful supplements I've ever read. And she hired me to do some writing for her, first on Haunts and then the Wraith Player's Guide. And then she sort of passed me over to Ian Lemke for Changeling. And before I knew it, I was in house as the Wraith and Mind's Eye Theater developer, as Jen had moved over to Vampire. And so I was in house at White Wolf for 4 years, working primarily on Wraith and Vampire the Dark Ages and Mind's Eye Theater, but really contributing to pretty much everything we were doing at the time, including Trinity and Exalted. And so just having a lot of fun doing all that. And then in 1999, I jumped to video games at Red Storm Entertainment, and I started by working on a game which is still known as the game which shall not be named at Red Storm, but it got better from there. And I spent 23
Did it
years.
ever come out? Is it
Oh, it came out. It was legend.
Legend? Isn't
Yes, but not in a good way.
okay. Go on. I'm sorry. Just I was just looking into it because I've never heard of the game called Legend. I could be
No,
mistaken,
no,
but
no.
please keep
It's not
going.
called Legend. It was just legendarily. Um,
Oh, okay, all right. So the game never
yes,
saw. I'm sorry
the
if there's
game
anything you
hit
don't
and
want.
left a crater, basically.
Damn, nice. Like the
Yes.
best games do. The best worst ones anyway.
This one had a story attached, but that's for another time. But I spent 23 years largely working on Tom Clancy games for Ubisoft, but also working on pretty much anything they needed me to do writing a narrative on. So in addition to the Rainbow Sixes and Ghost Recons and Splinter Cells and Divisions, I also did some work on the Far Cry series and For Honor and The Crew and The Crew 2 and Blazing Angels and Cold Fear and Assassin's Creed Nexus and pretty much anywhere they needed me to go. And I did that until the end of 2022 when I jumped to Crytek and spent a couple years working on Hunt Showdown. And then I spent some time working with Romero Games on a game which unfortunately was canceled and which will not see the light of day, which is a shame because it would be awesome. It's a great game.
It was really unfortunate with Romero. For anyone that doesn't know, it was a nascent studio created by John Romero, the John Romero of Doom fame. Unfortunately, things fell through for it, which was a shame.
Yes. And it was a wonderful place to work, and the project was fantastic. And I have this little tiny sliver of hope that it will get resurrected someday because it was a great game. But I did all that. I also have done a lot of writing about video games. My most recent book is called The Video Game Writer's Guide to Surviving an Industry That Hates You. And that came out in August, and people seem to be pretty happy with it. And also, I've written 8 novels and a couple short story collections, and I still keep my hand in the tabletop role playing stuff.
So you've been so we can say you've done the rounds, you've tried a little bit of everything in this field, genre fiction. So I kind of want to take things. from the top because we mostly bring a lot of novelists here. We mostly bring a lot of people who work in traditional publishing. I wanted to bring over a lot of people who worked in tabletop RPGs and get
Hmm.
different perspectives because it's completely different to writing fiction. I mean, sure, some parts in working for the White Wolf games, there was a lot of focus on fiction. There was a lot of focus on like the structure was kind of fiction based, but writing for a TTRPG is a different beast entirely.
Yeah, I would actually push back against that assessment a little bit because we did a lot of writing that was world building that wasn't necessarily fiction per se. The whole difference between writing fiction or movies or comics or the linear media and writing games, whether it be tabletop or video games, is the player, the interactivity. And the most important thing to internalize if you're going to be writing for games is that it is not your story. It is the player's story. You are just putting everything in place for the player or players to interact with it and create their story moment to moment, which is going to be the result of their unique interactions with what you created.
Which is weird to first of all grasp when you're writing for a game, especially if you're coming from fiction. How did you deal with it? Because the same thing is true with video games. How did you learn to do it? How did you or did you unlearn to work under these conditions? In this medium.
I learned it the hard way, of course, but no, the you have to grasp that if you're going to write for games, because if you try and control everything that happens in a game, you are not writing a game, you are writing a movie. And you have to understand the whole point of a game is for players to play, to explore, to try things out, to do what they want to do in that space. And once you realize that they are taking what you've made and telling their own story in their own way, all of a sudden the light bulb goes on and you can start writing to what I call the player shaped hole in the middle of all this. Because you've played video games, right?
Yeah, I mean, who hasn't?
Yeah, okay.
I
And
work in them actually, so yeah.
you've told stories about stuff you did in a video game, right?
Yes, and an
And
RPG.
every single one of those stories started with the word I.
Yes,
Not not Link, not Samus, not Master Chief, not Sam Fisher. I did that. And that's the kernel of understanding you really have to grasp because the player's always going to say, I. They're the ones controlling the moves, they're the ones making the decisions. And once you grasp that, all of a sudden there's this incredible new possibility of writing space that opens up in front of you where you're writing to what the player might do and doing what you can to make sure that anything they do feels like part of a good story. And it's very different from writing fiction, but it's fascinating and it's fun.
I mean, that's true because, like, if you think about the criteria by which we think, oh, a good adventure for a module for an RPG is written, or how a good game is written, it's not good literature. It's not Steinbeck levels or anything else. But because it rewards what the player does and reacts to what the player does and accounts for what the player does, like it has all these vicissitudes, people consider it to be a much better work.
It's a very different work, which I think is the most important thing to grasp. And comparing the writing in a video game to the writing in a movie or writing in a book is it's not apples to oranges, it's apples to turnips to hedgehogs. You're trying to do very different things in very different ways using some similar tools.
That
And
is
I'm sorry, you go, you
No,
go.
I'm just saying that is true. I'm seeing a lot of writers that especially go through change mediums keep trying to treat this as such. And there's also the issue that there are games that were hugely successful that were structured like movies, like The Last of Us, like the later God of Wars, that were structured like this. And a lot of people like reinforce this idea. They think a game works like this. So a lot of the time, especially for video games, to try to push this idea.
Well, there's video games are such a big tent, and yes, you have those linear story-driven games like Last of Us and God of War, which do what they do very well. But even in those games, there are infinite moments of player choice and infinite places of variation where the player can put their stamp of what they're doing and make that story theirs. And there's things that you can explore as side quests, things like that, that you don't have in a movie, you don't have in a novel. And even the most raily of rail shooters, even something like House of the Dead, you have stuff there that allows for the players to tell their own story. And that because they are invested in it, because it is what they are doing, it gives an entirely different sort of emotional impact. And Roger Ebert famously said that games don't live up to the level of movies and this. And he was completely right. And that they're not movies. They're not supposed to do that. They give you an entirely different experience. And you can get an incredibly powerful emotional experience from a game that you won't get from a movie. And you'll get an incredibly powerful emotional response from a movie you won't get from a game.
That's true. I mean, it's the same thing with RPGs, except with RPGs even fuzzier. Like you have even more degrees of freedom than you would in a video game. Right? For a video game is the art of understanding the limitations that you have. In an RPG, it's sky's the limit, and
Yeah.
you can't account. How do you feel sometimes? Do you sometimes feel like you get lost when you write for like RPGs and you try to account for as many possibilities for like all the vicissitudes and all the changes that the players can make, all the options, all the
No, no, it's 100% the opposite direction there. When I write for RPGs, I have a hard, fast rule, and I gave this to all my writers at White Wolf, who are working for me on Wraith and Vampire the Dark Ages and everything else. One story hook per paragraph. Writing tabletop RPG source material is an exercise in building out. You are giving the players all the tools and all the possibilities and setting them up and revving them up and telling them, go. And so I want to inspire. I want to have people say, oh, I could take this and do this with it. And so writing for tabletop RPGs is this explosion, really, of focus out in all directions. And the best thing you can do is lay a tight foundation, but also hint at all the possibilities. So the foundation can support people picking it up and running with it and doing their own thing with it. And it's strong for them to build on. And so that is one of the really cool things about writing for TTRPGs that is opposed to, say, writing for video games, where in video games you have to absolutely close off the narrative possibilities to make sure the player in their narrative fantasy wants to do what the game does well. I was writing a Splinter Cell game, I would write storylines and dialogue and cinematics to encourage the player to be a sneaky dude, climbing through air vents and along pipes in the dark, doing super secret spy stuff. I did not write storylines that made him want to go on a date or do a dance number or anything like that. You marry the narrative fantasy to the gameplay mechanics in a way that the player wants to do what the game wants them to do. And that's a narrowing of focus as opposed to an exploration.
Yeah, I mean, yeah, that's true. Like the better RPGs kind of like answer immediately and implicitly answer the question, what do I do in this game? And,
Mm-hmm.
it's not just the typical answer of a bad RPG. What can't you do? It's, it gives you a basis to do this. So I wanted to ask you something about this because you mentioned your philosophy. White Wolf was kind of infamous for having the dreaded meta plot for this, which I
Mm-hmm.
feel, based on what you described, might have like clashed with your design and writing philosophy. Do you ever feel like, for those that don't know, the meta plot was this overarching story arc that was moving across the White Wolf line games from beginning all the way to the end. And a lot of people felt it was restricting them. That's what I am asking Richard.
Well, honestly, my first few years there, we didn't really move the meta plot forward. It was always 2 minutes to midnight, and it was never 1 minute to midnight.
Yeah,
And that only started to change really towards the end of my tenure there. So for the World of Darkness games, the first few years I was there, that was not so much a restriction as it was a mood builder. Oh my God, something bad is going to happen really soon. And so that urgency informed a lot of things. And then eventually they decided to pay it off and reboot the World of Darkness with a new World of Darkness. And that pushes players in a certain direction, yes. And we did that in Ends of Empire with Wraith, where we blew up the entire setting and part of the metaphysics of the World of Darkness. But at the same time, if you look at the end of that book, there's a listing of here's all the new possibilities you have now. And also here's what happened to everybody you knew and loved from Wraith, you know, up to this point. So you can pick them up and run with them again. And also hey, if you don't like this, you can always set your game before all this happens. And when we did Wraith 20th Anniversary Edition, we rewound the clock to before that great maelstrom.
exactly. And Orpheus was a sequel to Wraith, if I recall correctly. It's never
Yes.
stated outright, but it's implied. It's a lot of it, which always felt to me, and I'm only saying this because like I really really liked Orpheus and I played a lot of it, But every
Hmm.
time I would run it, I would change the setting because the World of Darkness didn't quite fit Orpheus because it was such a huge, just the existence of that company. For those that don't know, Orpheus is a company that essentially uh, commodifies the existence of ghosts. It has a lot of ghost agents that go out and do a lot of like covert and overt operations. Anyway, just the existence of Orpheus would kind of like, throw the world in for a spin. It would be like such a huge revelation. I always felt like kind of strange. Like, why would it be in the world of darkness? I felt it should be in its own setting.
I the pieces of the world of darkness always fit together reasonably well, not
Mhm.
perfectly. And so I just sort of put it in that space. It's like, you look at the map of the world and it's obvious that South America and Africa fit together, but it's not a 100% match. And there's going to be some gaps and bumps and whatever, things like that. And yes, they're all in the sort of shared mythology, but depending upon which perspective you're looking at it from, certain things are elevated and certain things are pulled back, and certain stuff that makes sense from over here don't doesn't make sense over here. And so that's how I looked at it. I mean, I was happy to include Orpheus in Wraith 20th Anniversary Edition to sort of bridge that gap a little better and make sure that there was a synthesis and a way to add that to Wraith storytelling and also add more Wraith content to Orpheus storytelling for people who like that. But I never worried about there being a 100% perfect match with anything because it wasn't going to happen. And really, that's what kept me up nights working on Mind's Eye Theater, trying to figure out how cross services work. And eventually, I just gave it up as they'll figure it out.
I mean, you can't account for any possible factor. It's impossible. You just
Yes.
can't do it. You kind of count on the group, and also there's the added benefit that in a tabletop RPG, because it's run by fuzzy brained humans, we can kind of hand wave stuff.
Yes.
So anything that doesn't make sense, you can just kind of move it. In comparison to games where you don't have the choice because everything is hard and set, it has its limitations. Was it a huge difference to you to make that leap? Was it harder? Was it easier for you, in your experience?
The best thing that I had for me going from tabletop RPGs and especially LARPs, honestly, to video games was understanding that the game was for the player. And that innate understanding of interactivity gave me a huge boost when I started working in video games. And yeah, there were a lot of smaller things that I had to sort of unlearn or relearn or just shift my focus on. And one was that, yes, this is absolute. Another was that it was, as in design and story, I was one cog in a big, complicated machine. And I could not just do the thing on my own because everything I did impacted everybody else. And when I was working on a White Wolf book and I, realized at 3 in the morning I had made a continuity error in something, I could sneak back into the office, which I frequently did, and change the manuscript. And that was that. End of problem. If I decide I want to change a line in a video game, suddenly that means, okay, we need the voice studio and the actor and the voice director and the sound engineer and the guys on the audio team in the video game. And then the mission scripter's got to place that line of dialogue, and localization has to translate the new line of dialogue into 10 different languages, and QA's got to test. And it's like 17 different people are impacted by
And you
changing one
didn't
line
even
of
go into
dialogue.
cutscenes, right? Where you have to redo the lip sync and the whole
Um,
the whole shebang, the whole other nightmare.
Honestly, cutscenes are the easiest part of it. It's when you're actually dealing with stuff that's in the gameplay that things get
Yes,
really wild.
yes, because
Cinematics are sort of self-contained and they are what they are. But when you're dealing with stuff that's the player is actually interacting with moment to moment, there are so many amazing ways for it to go horribly wrong.
no, I get it. I absolutely no, I absolutely know. Like from my experience as well, uh, you have to be concise. You have to be to the point. You have to be coherent. I call it the art of shutting up. Like you need to know how to
Mhm.
pace your writing to the gameplay loop. So, given your experience, in your experience, more likely, where does writing fit into like the whole tangled mess that is game development?
If you're doing it right, it is there from the very beginning.
Yeah.
You are there for the initial conception of the game, and so you are building a narrative that complements and synergizes with the gameplay, the features, the art concepts, all that is working in harmony from the get-go. And then what happens is you do your original sort of narrative pitch, and once you do multiple iterations of that, once that is accepted, everybody's on board, then you start breaking down to smaller sections, mission designs, or area designs, stories for that. And then you get more granular. Okay, here's this mission story, and here's this quest story. And then you get more granular than that. Okay, here's the main dialogue we need to do this mission. And then you get more granular than that, which is, okay, here's the background chatter that builds the world. And at the same time, you're sitting over here going, okay, here are the 150 variants on lookout grenade that this game is going to need. Only it's going to be a lot more than 150. And so writing is there all the way along, from the most high level brainstorming the beginning to the very generic or very granular stuff at the very end. And even once the script writing is done, per se, your job as a writer is not done, because there are pieces of text that need to go into the UI. There are item descriptions. There are things that you need to write for lore, though, maybe go in a lore blog, things like that. There's going to be inevitably pickup sessions where you have to rewrite lines and do reshoots. And there are all these tasks that involve game writing that are so far beyond just I write the cutscene that people don't understand exist. Literally half my writing, at least as a video game writer, never goes in front of the player. It's to other members of the team. It's here's what this character is like, here's what they look like, here's how they move, here's how they sound. It's here's the history of the world in a way that you need to know to build the architecture that the player never needs to read, because it will almost certainly bore them to tears if it is presented in game when they want to be playing instead. You can present it another way in a lore blog or a video or a transmedia thing, whatever. But the point is, there is so much to this job beyond what people think the job is.
Right, which brings me to the thing. So it seems that you mostly have, a positive experience, the way it sounds, which brings me to the title of your book, right? The
I knew we'd
Writer's
get here
Guide
eventually.
in the industry. I mean, we have to talk about it, right? I mean, your experience, how you describe writing for games, is kind of like the opposite from mine, because a lot of the games I've worked on, the game is mostly done, and then they bring me and they say, "We don't know what any of this is. We don't know what the story is. We just need you to bring in and give this context." So
I
it's
have done that many, many, many
exactly.
times. I have literally had we go into the studio on Thursday. Can you write the game this week?
Yes, yes. And we have the
So
game. We don't know what this is. Why are there triangles? This, the whole
yes.
situation. So in your experience, what led you to write a book with that kind of name?
What it really came down to was sitting on the plane to GDC in 2024 and thinking about all the books on video game writing that people I knew and respected and liked had written that were really good books, but being bothered by the fact that these were books on how to write this stuff, how to create the deliverables, and what there had never been, and what I had never seen, and what I had had to mentor people through time and time and time and time again, whether they were working directly for me or another studio and just reached out, was how to do the job day by day, minute by minute. What do you actually have to do besides write the words in order to be successful in this role and to get your writing out there in the best way possible? And I have been through the wars. I've been doing this 26 years. I have seen things you cannot imagine in various projects that were just, yeah,
Rewrites off the edge of Tannhauser Gate. Yeah, you know.
yes, yeah, exactly, yes.
Yes.
And rather than just go full Roy Batty and say, time to die, I decided to do something about it. What I did want to do was I looked at this and I said, there is no base of knowledge that is shared. No school
No.
was teaching this. Studios don't have this institutional training. They don't spend money on training, and they particularly don't spend money on training writers. And we get siloed studio by studio by studio. There needs to be a common base of knowledge. There needs to be a shared vocabulary and shared best practices and things that we can talk about back and forth to ourselves, so we don't feel like it's just us. And that is one of the responses I have gotten to the book, which is so many writers have written to me and said, I thought it was just me. No, it's not you. It's everywhere. And so that's why I decided to write the book. And the joke was it took me 25 years to write this book and 6 months to type it. And that's actually a lie because it only really took me about 4 months once I knuckled down. But also, I've said this elsewhere, but the running joke was the working title of this book was McDonald's French fries because it was so salty.
I mean, it does feel like that. We do get it's not with writers even outside the video game industry. A lot of us get either trapped in echo chambers or
Hmm.
we are kind of like isolated. It's an unfortunate reality of the situation. Even people who socialize with other writers, they
Hmm.
mostly end up trapped like an echo chamber. They don't get to see the situation the way it is and be able to.
Exactly. And so I wanted to give people the techniques that I had learned to promote your writing as best as possible from your fingers to the player. I mean, okay, I'll throw this out here. My favorite example. Much Ado About Nothing, acclaimed Kenneth Branagh film. Keanu Reeves as Don John, and he is awful.
Yeah,
And and
yeah.
yet, does anybody say the writing was crap? No, it's Shakespeare. It's pretty clear the writing was great and the acting was crap. And you can say what you want about Branagh's directing, whatever. But the point is, it's not always the writing. And in many cases, it's not the writing. And bad things happen to the writing along the way from the actual composition to when it gets to the player. And that's where I sort of start the book with, hey, it's not the writing's fault a lot of the time. And then moving on to here is how you present your writing in a way that'll get heard. Here is how you build pipelines that will help you write better. Here's how you build feedback loops that'll help you get better feedback and produce better material. Here is how you talk to producers to help you get what you need to do your job. And all of those things are so incredibly important to doing the day-to-day job that I've had to teach people this over and over and over and over again. And I thought it would be a good thing to put it out there where everybody can pick it up and run with it. And I do believe the industry hates writers. I don't think necessarily most devs hate writers. Most of the people I've worked with over the years have been great, but they don't speak the language creatively. They don't understand it because they don't understand it. They don't value it. They don't treat writing well. They set it up to fail in many cases, and then they blame it for failing. And so the industry as a whole, I think, hates writing.
No, it's an unfortunate reality, and the worst part of the whole situation is that you keep seeing games that have great writing, that do well, and they learn their lesson for like 5 minutes, and then they forget again, and then they go back to the same old, same old. It's in my experience, there's like a wave of kind of like anti-intellectualism, kind of like in the industry that's always been there forever. A lot of people like don't stop with this. They're like, oh, don't stop to tell a story. Don't stop for this. We need to
Yeah.
do this thing. We can't tell a high-minded story. We need to. I don't know how to say it. Soviet
It's
mentality,
it
where they make the
yeah.
tank and then they jump onto the tank as it comes off the line to go fight the Nazis. That kind of Soviet mentality.
It's sort of a brutalist approach. And the problem is that it is because writing sort of came late to the game in game development. It had previously just been, sort of a side gig for the designer or whatever. It has a sense of being sort of the new kid, and it wasn't there in the garage days. And also, it's not quantifiable. So, I mean, art looks like the thing or it doesn't look like the thing. Code works or it doesn't work. A mechanic is functional or it's not functional. Writing hard to quantify, and everybody types so they think they can write, and that leads to a lack of respect for the professional craft. And also writing, if you're writing, you're not just typing constantly, and a producer looks over and you're going, and they say you're not being productive. And again, all that goes into the lack of respect that writing gets.
That kind of brings me to the fact that kind of a skill. I'm sure you go over this in your book, and you can tell me about your experience. There's the issue where you kind of need to speak the language of the other specialties. Pretty much,
Absolutely, yes. Yes.
most artists won't read a long document. Most producers, have trouble, like you said, quantifying it. Designers have trouble understanding why a scene should be set up like this. And a lot of times, writers I've met a lot of writers that don't want to learn how games work,
Hmm.
don't want to learn their limitations. So it's kind of like a holistic problem with the industry.
Hmm. Yes. And I am sorry. I know that, the sort of myth of writing that a lot of us were fed growing up is that the writing itself should be enough. That if your writing is good, that should
No.
do all the heavy lifting. And that's not the case. You have to champion your writing. You have to communicate your writing in a place where it can be read and understood and picked up by other people. Yes, you absolutely have to learn to speak to other departments in their language so they can learn to value what you're doing and they can put it in their terms to understand it. I am never going to ask a producer to work with me on character motivations. It's not what they're good at. It's not what they're trained at. It's not what they're interested in. It's a waste of everybody's time. And I'm not going to make arguments to them based on character motivation because they're not going to get it. And that's not their fault. And I don't blame them
But
for
you
it.
might just have to and have to find a way to do it because otherwise they won't make time to help the animator
Yes.
do the little thing, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera.
But what I'm going to say to that producer is, hey, if we do this new scene with this character, that changes these four other scenes, which I am now going to have to rewrite, which is going to take us an extra 2 weeks. And then we're going to have to re-record them, which is going to take this much money. And then we're going to have to implement it, which is going to take 2 more weeks. And speaking to them in their language of the consequences of narrative change, of the consequences of writing, that opens the door to the further conversation of, and it's going to be better if we do this thing because that matches these other scenes that we've written and we don't have to change stuff. So that's how you start those conversations. And if you speak to them in their terms and make it clear you're thinking about the game, not just about your writing, that you're not being precious and writerly and a snowflake and an artiste, and that you are interested in collaborating and doing this for the good of the game instead of wanting your writing to be the super special thing, then you can get somewhere. And then you build trust. And then they start listening to you when you make other arguments because you've demonstrated you know what you're talking about and you're interested in the game, not just in your own stuff.
Right. Which brings me to the idea. So essentially, all these things we've been talking about for this time. It's you've been in the industry for 20 years, if I'm not mistaken.
26 years in video games and then
26
four
years.
plus in tabletop before that.
Like compared to mine, I've just been for 10, so it's like I'm still picking it up. So, how does someone start learning how to talk to other departments and understand their work? Like, where do
The
they
best,
start?
if you go to a conference or you got the GDC vault, listen to talks from other specialties, listen to their language, ask questions, go up to your teammates and say, hey, I'm interested in learning more of what you do and how we can collaborate better. What do you want me to know? What do you need to hear from me when I talk to you about story? And you build those bridges one conversation at a time. And I am not saying that every writer needs to be a senior level expert in art and modeling and animation and audio and engineer. No, no, no. I'm saying you know the basics and you know their concerns and you can lay out your stuff in a way that they can understand it within that context. But it all starts with starting the conversation.
Which that's kind of like the hard part for people to understand. For me, what I tell people if they don't have the chance to do it, like for example, I'm in Greece, we don't have any conferences here. There are a
Mm-hmm.
few across the EU, but a lot of us can't afford it. What I usually like to tell people is, as an alternative, is getting their hands dirty, like trying different disciplines, trying them from themselves, and getting the experience that way, the harder
Mm-hmm.
way, at least. That's what I usually recommend.
That can absolutely work too, but you again that you run the risk of making the same mistakes over and over again. And instead of doing that, or in addition to doing that, I would really recommend you go on something like LinkedIn and find people who worked on games you liked in those disciplines and see what they have to say and become a part of that conversation. Go to a virtual conference like Lunaricon and get involved in there. Join a professional group like if there's an IGDA chapter or if there's an online chapter, online organization. Anna McGill does a great job with the Discord for Interactive Narrative for writers and just talk to people. And there's, we're in an incredibly connected world. There are more ways to reach out than just face to face. And it's not perfect. And, obviously the sit down for 5 minutes to talk over coffee is the best, but you can start building those connections online. You can start building those through game jams. If one of those happens, you can start building those through somebody's social media and becoming a part of the conversation in the comments section. And by asking smart questions and being genuine.
I mean, yeah, that absolutely works. And also, of course, what I usually also tell people is playing games and checking how games with limited resources manage to tell the same story, because you
Hmm.
kind of need to put yourself into this, um, I'd call it subsistence mindset. So
Hmm.
how to get your story across with a minimal amount of like whatever you have. Because a lot of the times what people don't understand is like you said, the minimal change that you're making is 2 weeks of work.
Yes.
And you can't control how the player experiences the story. So,
Hmm.
unless you can tie it with gameplay, there's nothing you can do. It usually doesn't
Yes.
stick. Which is speaking of, do you have any games that you particularly like that manage to tell the story with as little as possible?
Well, I mean, you start with Journey and Limbo. Uh,
Oh, right,
yes.
right, right.
So absolutely no dialogue, but a ton of narrative, and the player crafts this incredible story through their journey, if to use a phrase. And and so something like that does a remarkable job of creating a player's story with no with no dialogue, without verbiage. And then you step up to things that are very light on that sort of thing, but still tell tremendous stories with the player. Um, what Remains of Edith Finch is probably my favorite game of the last decade, honestly. And that is not something that is hugely talky. What that is a lot of very short moments where the narrative fantasy of what happened to this family member is married perfectly to that specific mechanic, and none of that overstays its welcome. And there's always a drive to go forward, and it is amazing, and I love it. And then you walk from that all the way up to a Baldur's Gate 3, where you have enough dialogue to make Brandon Sanderson go, "Oh, that's a lot of words," and it's and it does what it does perfectly. I'm a big believer that every game has an appropriate amount of narrative, which is not the same as the most narrative. Find that sweet spot, write to that, or work with the rest of the team to create that narrative that hits the experience properly. When I came into the industry, there was this long running story versus gameplay fight thing, and I always thought that was bullshit.
It is.
It's dumb. What you should be thinking is that narrative on one hand and gameplay on the other should be working together to create the best gameplay experience. And on the narrative side, I should be creating a fantasy that encourages the player to do all the stuff the game does really well so they have fun. And on the gameplay side, they should be building gameplay that makes people want to experience more of this narrative that I've created because that's who they want to be right now because they're doing cool stuff.
Which is, yeah, it's an unfortunate situation, and the reason why it's not happening is mostly on the dev side, because like you said, writing is the new kid. Which brings me to this thing that I wanted to ask you, since you did mention it. Have you had an experience with wordless games, like like Journey, like Limbo, etc.?
I have not worked on a game that was completely non-dialogue. I worked on stuff that was very minimally dialogue. Outland is an example where that was I just wrote cinematics basically and between mission voiceovers. So that was the closest I got there. And then you rewind to like the early Ghost Recons that I wrote for. There were no in-mission cutscenes. There were no in-mission conversations. You had a briefing in the beginning and a briefing at the end, and in between you just had he shot me. Um,
So my question is, how do you manage to condense the story, to kind of like make it work, to make the most with as little as possible? That's in your experience. Like, what are the best kind of approaches you've tried that worked?
well, you start with okay, what is the game trying to accomplish? What is the player that this game is for? Is this a player who's going to want to hear a lot of dialogue? Is even a fraction of our player base going to want to hear a lot of the stuff? Yes, no. And then you tune to the core player how much of this stuff you need to do. And then once you do that, you write everything out and you start trimming and you trim and you trim and you trim. It's always better to write big and cut down. But you ask yourself with every line that you write, what does the player get out of this? Is this useful knowledge for advancing the game? Is this useful knowledge about the world they are going to want to know? Is this useful knowledge about their character? Is this useful knowledge about something they can do? And if the answer is no, it's just cool, mood stuff, then it potentially goes on the chopping block, unless you're doing, say, a horror game where mood is one of the gameplay features.
Yeah, absolutely.
And
I agree.
so,
Yeah.
yeah, yeah, it's iterative and going full sushi chef um, on your dialogue as you get faster and faster. But you learn very quickly the player does not want to listen to you be clever in your dialogue. The player wants to play, and they want your dialogue to be the thing that helps them play better, to move forward through the play. And they want it to be good writing, they want it to be fun, they want to fall in love with your characters, but they don't want you to get in the way of them doing a thing.
Yeah, or ideally, they want you to love to hate your characters. You need to get a good approach between these. I mean, that's very interesting about getting this, but this again falls into understanding that your writing needs to work with the game, not despite it,
Yes.
which is the
Yes.
mistake we all keep making every time, every time.
Well,
You,
if you're a professional, you stop making that mistake pretty quickly, or you stop being a professional. Where I hear it is mostly from people who are not writers who think that's how writers think. And they're like, oh, the writers just want to be in charge. No, no, we don't want to be. I don't want to be in charge. I don't want to have those meetings. I want to work with everybody to make something cool. And every good writer I have worked with, from senior level down to junior, has been 100% on board with we're making part of a game, as opposed to I am a creative genius and you all will follow my lead. Those people, by and large, don't last, nor should they. And you have a sacred duty to weed them out as quickly as possible before they damage the rest of your dev team.
I mean, yeah. But also, people stop listening to them eventually. I mean, in my experience, essentially.
Yeah.
Right. So this has been very enlightening, especially for the situation, so for people that are outside of the team. So what I wanted to ask you is, what are you working on at the moment outside of games?
Okay. This could take a while because I don't sleep much. So I have a novel called Nightmare Logic coming out next year, and a short story collection called Letters to the Dead coming out next year. I also have a horror themed graphic novel that I co-wrote with the legendary French graphic novelist Mats coming out probably end of next year. It's called Bridgewater, and that'll be in French. And hopefully, Mats did the French part. I did the horror part.
Okay.
But so hopefully we'll have an English language version of that at some point. I'm also in playtesting on a card game that I co-designed with my girlfriend called Squatches and Scotches. So we'll see where that goes. And
What's it
obviously,
about?
it is about going off into the woods to drink your single malt scotch when Bigfoot shows up and tries and steal it from you. And so the gameplay is basically trying to balance between, okay, I've got to drink my scotch and I've got to send Bigfoot after the other players. So if I may be crude for a moment, the main gameplay mechanic is total fuckery. Um, so there's that, and we've been playtesting that, and that's a lot of fun. I'm really happy with it. And also working on wrapping up my next novel, which features a character from several short stories I've already written and published, named Reb Palash, who's a magical pirate rabbi. And he's fun to play with. And I keep on putting him in an impossible situation, and he goes, "I got this," and then he does. It's
He's got no time
astonishing.
for kvetching.
Now he's got plenty of time for questions, but he'll just ask you
No,
questions
no, for
back.
kvetching, not question
Yes,
kvetching.
yes, yes. But yeah, so he's off fighting zombies and sea monsters and things like that, and that's been a lot of fun to write. And then I just have I've had a bunch of short stories come out this year. I've got one that just came out at Forgotten Frequency called Open for Business. And I have another one coming at Pseudopod later this month, which is called Give a Dog a Bone, which is the third one in a sequence of stories I've written about a werewolf family Thanksgiving.
Nice.
Thank you. It does not go well, in case you're wondering, but
No, I assumed as much. Human Thanksgivings don't go well most of the time, so
yes, yes.
so I understand. So you're keeping busy. That's very good to know. And I mean, I'm super looking forward to it, to see what you're working on. Where can people get their hands on your wonderful guide about the industry that hates them?
Oh, I have an online store actually, and I'll send you the link for that. So you
Yes,
can order it directly from me, so I can autograph it for you if you'd like, or you can get it
absolutely.
at Amazon or any online retailer. Um, and yeah, it's a book I'm really proud of, and I think it has been very helpful to a lot of people and has done some good. And I don't view it as a be all and end all. I don't view it as the definitive last word on this stuff. I view it as a conversation starter. And I think it has a lot of value to people who can then read that and say, this applies to my situation. Let's go.
Absolutely. Well, Richard, thank you very much for coming over. Very glad to have you. We're very glad to have had you over. Is there any last bit of wisdom you want to share with the audience?
Yeah. Which is as a writer, both fiction and games, my job is to help people have fun. And I realized this very early on, and it's fantastic. It makes me so happy to say I do that. And yeah, there's all these hiccups and bumps in the road and people who make it hard to do the job and occasionally make me drink heavily, whatever. But in the end of the day, people come up to me and say, "Hey, I really enjoyed that game." And maybe it was the game I worked on last year. Maybe it was a game I worked on 20 years ago. I gave people some fun, and that means the world.
Thank you very much for coming over. This was such a great closing statement. I'm
Well,
gonna
thank you.
keep this in mind.
Thank you for
So
having me.
no, glad to have you. So everybody, this has been the Writers Hangout. Once again, Richard, thank you for coming over. Everybody, have a good night and good luck.